Howdy, this is Tony Nestor with the Ancient Pathways Survival School in Flagstaff, Arizona. Decided to do a little program on our survival course we're doing with the military right now. Going to cover some of the shelters that these guys have set up out here. They're staying in the next 5 days in the high desert at about 6,500 feet elevation. And it's just designed to cover some of the evasion and also survival shelters you'd use in this type of environment with a bare minimum of gear. So this is my shelter here, and I talked about these in another video about Basketweave shelters we use here with these giant juniper trees. And you just work with the existing geometry of the tree limbs to create your shelter. And so I didn't lash anything here. I didn't have to bust up a ridgepole to make this. I'm using an existing tree branch here that's angled at the correct angle that I need. And then I just wove in my branches like a basket to create the backing here. And it's just a chinking process, covering it with debris, dirt, rocks at the base, and then kicking up all the duff. Now I've got a debris bed here made of about a foot of duff that I slept on, and I find that I'm good to about 45 degrees with the clothes on my back, assuming there's no wind blowing, assuming that I ate, I'm hydrated, I'm not injured, all that stuff. After that it gets pretty cold and I'm going to need a fire. But after you get acclimated to the cold here and you don't have too extreme conditions, you can get by 45-50 degrees with a shelter like this at the right time of year. Again, there's no wind, you're not compromised, you have good clothing on and that kind of thing. Here's another hooch here. These guys are bringing in some different gear that they're testing out, and different types of sleeping systems and clothing and things like that. So each night they're trying out different items, but they're all building all have built a shelter out of natural materials. And these are all facing the east here, and they get that nice east and southern exposure throughout the day. And most importantly, it's cutting back the wind, because our predominant winds come out of this pass right here. In fact, the Hopis say that their wind god, Yopansa, lives in a crack in the side of the mountain on the other side of that other shorter mountain over there. So I'm pretty sure he does. It gets pretty brutal out here, 50, 60 mile an hour winds. That's what we had last week. Sometimes even 18-wheelers blow off the highway, or the highways are shut down because of sandstorms. So it can be brutal. So we have the backs on these shelters to the prevailing wind. And here's what that back looks like. It's covered with bark, with some old snakeweed, some rabbit brush, whatever you have. We're not obviously stripping down all the junipers here, because I do courses on a weekly basis out here all year, and we wouldn't have any trees left. So we're not doing that part. That's what you would do in a true survival situation. But for the sake of practice here, we're not going to that extent. Check out this nice mansion. He's got a nice overhead on this. He's got the sides closed up as well. And he built it next to a gigantic juniper tree. Lots of resources. That's important if you're injured, if you're really dehydrated or in a debilitated state and you don't have the means of walking very far to gather materials. You want to build your shelter in a resource-rich area here. Another shelter, again, built with that same geometry, working with the juniper branches, natural angles and bends here, nothing really modified on the tree itself. And with these types of shelters in the desert, you're striving for protection from the wind and protection from the sun at certain times of year. It's pretty chilly time of year right now, can be anyways. We've kind of lucked out with a good week, 70 during the day and 40s and 50s at night. But March, April can be pretty dicey out here, so you're not striving for the type of shelter that you would find in a forested environment where you have a lot of pine needles and resources. I mean, look at it out here. We've got scrub, we've got a handful of juniper trees, not a lot on the ground in terms of pine needles and leaves to work with. So here you're striving for protection from the sun and protection from the wind. And then here's the last shelter. There are a couple more spread out here, but I'm just hitting these main ones. And we've got, again, same structure, same setup, an old juniper tree here. One thing you do want to avoid are sometimes you find these pack rat nests. That's not a good thing. Good thing for setting your deadfalls and traps, but you want to check the base of these junipers. Obviously, if you're finding that type of presence of rodents, and sometimes you find them in these trees out here. These pack rat nests have been around for 20, 30 generations of pack rats. You're going to have a lot of fleas. You're going to have a lot of critters at night visiting you. So definitely scope out those, file those away for future reference in terms of getting food and setting deadfalls, but you steer clear of those. Here's an old lean-to here that somebody built about 6 months ago, and of course, problem with utilizing old shelters like this, and this also applies to caves and dwellings of that nature, is if you're not living in these things full time, they quickly get taken over by rats and mice. And where you have issues in the desert with bubonic plague, with things like hantavirus, you don't want to be going in and stirring up any of those droppings, inhaling that stuff, or getting fleas on you. It might carry plague. So we break down old shelters, or we just avoid them altogether, depending on how they look. But I definitely wouldn't be using this one here. We'd bust this apart, or if it's got signs of rodent droppings and things like that, which it probably does, then I'm just gonna steer clear of that and build me a new one.